All right, so welcome to Navigating the U.S. Job Search for International Students. We have a busy, presentation for you today, so I will just get right into it. So the agenda for the day is I'll briefly give an overview and a few resources for you all. And my name is Jake Kelzer. I work at the International Center. And then putting together an effective strategy will be presented by Rachel from the Career Center. I'll let Rachel introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Rachel. I am the career coach for international students, and I work at the University Career Center.
And then next we'll go over some legal/immigration issues, and my colleague Monica will be presenting on that. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Monica Roskamp. I'm an international student and scholar advisor, and I'm sure I've met many of you on this presentation.
All right, and then Beth Hoffman-Lopez from the International Center will be joining us later, and she'll be talking about H-1B and permanent residency considerations. So you'll hear from her towards the end of the presentation. So I guess before I get into it, I also wanted to mention, well, you know that this is being recorded, so the recording will be available on the International Center's website. Maybe give it a day or two after, or a business day or two after this presentation, and it'll be available at this link that I just shared in the chat. Also, closed captioning is available for anyone who wants to follow along a transcript. And then if you don't mind, just please keep yourself muted, and we will have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. So you can either unmute yourself and ask your questions, or you can type them into the chat. And if we don't address them at the time that they're asked during the presentation, we'll make sure we have some time to address them at the end of the presentation, the Q&A. So as you can see on the screen, we have cultural and immigration issues in the job search. So I'm not going to go into detail about these, but just a few links for you to look through as you're pursuing your job search. The first is common cultural barriers to the job search. This could include things like communication differences across cultures, like direct versus indirect communication, things like that. Maybe how to talk about yourself. Some cultures might be not as comfortable promoting themselves in interviews, where in the United States that is more common. So different types of tips like that. The next gives interview fashion and grooming tips, suggestions on what to wear and how to carry yourself in interviews that may be useful. Then the other link is career boosting strategies for international students. So this just includes tips of how to make yourself more marketable, maybe ways to kind of beef up your resume, like opportunities to pursue on campus or volunteer opportunities in your community, different types of tips like that. Then the last two links have to do with in your interview. If you could ask questions about your like if you're authorized to work in the United States, and that will can bring up issues of whether or not you should share your visa status or immigration status, things like that. So we definitely recommend in your free time looking through those links. And then the next is campus resources. So first is the English Language Institute, or ELI. They offer courses, they do advising, they have events and programs that help connect students with each other, help give opportunities to work on your English language skills. So definitely take advantage of ELI opportunities while you're here. So if you're interested in improving specifically your writing skills, the Sweetland Center for Writing provides writing workshops and courses, and they're a valuable resource. I'm an American, and when I was a student here, I even used Sweetland Writing Center for help. So don't feel bad or ashamed or anything to use their services, because all students do it, and they're great for resumes, preparing for interviews, different things like that. So definitely recommended to take advantage of their resources as well. Then in the past, we've had 2 workshops that we've held by an immigration attorney. The first is about H-1B, temporary worker and specialty occupation basics. And the other is an employment-based U.S. permanent residency information. We hope that there will be an H-1B presentation maybe in mid-April. I'm waiting to hear back from the immigration attorney on specific dates. And then we probably won't have a permanent residency one this semester. Last semester we held one. And if you click on that link, in which this presentation will be shared with you, there is going to be recording available, and the information is from that recording is still pertinent. And then lastly, it's not on this slide, but of course you can utilize the International Center's various resources from our website, whether it's things about the Ann Arbor community or immigration related resources, or attending our different events and programs. So wanted to mention that before we got started with the presentation. So that's all I have to say, and now I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Rachel.
Thank you, Jake. I will now start sharing my screen. Can everyone see this okay? Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. Like I said, my name is Rachel. I am the career coach for international student, and today my presentation is putting together an effective U.S. job search strategy for international students. So if you join us a little bit later, you're welcome to scan this QR code right here to check yourself in. I have about 40 minutes with you all, so let's jump right into it. Before we get started, I just really wanted to say that job search is so much more than writing a resume and sending it out to a gazillion employers. So today we're going to talk about 4 aspects of a more effective approach to job searching. First one, know yourself and what you're looking for. Understand the U.S. job market, employers' expectations, and culture norms. Develop appropriate job or internship search materials and approaches. Last but not the least, execute, persevere, but have alternative plans as well. So before we jump right into that, it is really important for you to know or thoroughly familiarize yourself with your visa and employment authorizations. And you want to understand employers' hesitation to hire international students, and make sure to be prepared to educate potential employers as needed. We do have a separate programs for this one called the International Student Career Series, talk about your immigration status to employers. We are going to talk about that a little bit more later. All right, some relevant resources before we get started. Visa types and employment authorizations. International Center is here to help you guys with that. And we get this question asked a lot, why U.S. employers are often not receptive to hire international students. There could be a lot of reasons. So let's talk about some of them. Companies' policies may restrict their ability to hire international students. Companies may not even offer OPT, knowing that they will not be able to eventually hire international students. H-1B requires an application and legal fees for several thousands of dollars paid by the hiring department. Companies may have to prove there was not an equal qualified U.S. citizen for a certain position for permanent residency. And in some cases, if a company needs to downsize, they may have to terminate the foreign employee before they can lay off any U.S. citizen for similar roles. And if you would like to learn more information or share this information with employers, we do have a resource put up by Interstrike. We are going to talk about that a little bit if you're not familiar with that. They have what is called U.S. Employers Guide to Hire International Students, and this is available on our website right over here. All right, so let's jump right into it. The first one, know yourself and what you're looking for. Know yourself. What are some of your skills and strengths, and what can you offer to an employer? What problems can you solve? So if you're still in that exploration phase, totally okay. I just want to recommend a couple of assessment tools that we offer here at the University Career Center. We currently offer 3 assessment tools. The first one is called Clifton Strengths. That one is helping you to identify your talent, and then you can turn those talent into strengths. And strengths can set you up for success in a lot of ways, like in your future career, in your job search, or in your interview phase even. So that test is mostly about helping you identify your talent and maximize your potentials. And then we have the MBTI Myers-Briggs Types Indicator. That one is helping you to understand different personalities and also help you to understand different decision-making styles, different preferred work environment, and also your preferred language being used in this space. So that one is really good with your career exploration and development. And also last but not the least, we have a strong interest inventory, SII. That one is helping you to identify your personalities with your future career. So it's going to compare your interest with people in general and people who are currently happy and satisfied with their job, so that test is helping you to make a connection between your interest and your future job. And also, if you're looking for ways to kind of do your exploration on your occupations, I really recommend using ONET. It allows you to find occupations based on tech skills, soft skills, STEM major or not, and a lot more. So I definitely recommend going to ONET and see and do a little bit of a career exploration there. And what you're looking for, in what kind of industry, in what job function. We do offer different numbers of career tracks here. We currently offer 10 of them. So focusing on consulting, data science, fashion, finance, government, health, law, marketing, advertising or PR, nonprofit, sports. So if you enroll in those career tracks, it's going to give you specific resources to help you get started on targeted job and internship postings and so much more. So if you're looking for ways to join them, we do have 2 ways. The first one is click on join a career track right here, or you're welcome to go into Handshake and enroll on your own. All right, so jumping back, learn about your visa rules. Obviously, that's very important. So if you would like to learn more about that, please work with the International Center. And the bottom part is read intentionally because you want to start early. Your job search will take longer than you think. All right, jumping on to the second point, understand the U.S. job market, employers' expectations, and culture norms. Grades alone are not enough. What you really want to emphasize is on your experience and co-curricular engagement. And I know some of you are already enrolled in student organizations or participating in them. That's wonderful. So if you're looking for more for just exploration purposes, you're welcome to visit the MACE page for more information. And I want to highlight a micro internship opportunity called Forage. Forage has a lot of case studies and simulations to help you understand what is it like to work in that specific organization. So after you complete the case studies or the simulations, it's going to give you a certification. You're welcome to put that certification on your LinkedIn or on your resume just under extracurricular section. And specific skills and trade, you want to be able to link your personal story with what the employers want. If you're looking for, what employers are wanting right now, I do recommend checking this out. It is the 8 career competencies developed by NACE, National Association of College and Employers. Basically, a group of career counselors came up together with a group of employers. To come up with these 8 competencies, and that's exactly what the employers are looking for. These competencies focuses on direct crit and self-development, communication, critical thinking, equity and inclusion, leadership, professionalism, teamwork, and technology. So most likely you already have them developed through your classes, but you're also welcome to develop them through internships, campus involvement, and voluntary activities. All right, so jumping back again. And you are the person that actually has to do it. It is really important for you to self-advocate for yourself, taking initiatives and networking. So if you're looking for ways to network, we recommend 2 ways. So if we can go to LinkedIn right here, so it allows you to go to our institution website. So by clicking on alumni, you can filter based on where they work, where they live, what they do, what their skill at, and so on. So that way you can connect with alums from different industries who were also enrolled in our institution once before. And what I really want to highlight is a platform called UCAN, which stands for University Career Alumni Network. All right, so if we click on here, UCAN is a platform that can help you connect with alums and other professionals to have a conversation on career-related topics or ask them for informational interviews. Let's connect now. So since I already have my profile, it will just take me right in. But if you are like a first-time user or you haven't been exploring this tool, it's gonna ask you to answer a couple questions, but nothing too crazy. So let's go to browse. Sometimes it takes a while to load because as you can see, we have many online users right now. You're welcome to filter based on location, industry. If you don't see your industry right here, you're welcome to use the search bar over here. Field of study or majors if you just want to connect with people that is with your major area. So I really want to introduce affiliations here and click on international. So if you want to connect with the international alumni because they know exactly what you're going through right now, you're welcome to use the international filter. So let's click on apply for demo purposes. All right, so after looking at their profiles, I probably want to connect with Eugene. Let me scroll down and look at their profile and take a closer look. Okay, they're interested in helping me to apply for graduate school or prepare for grad school or talk about work-life balance. Okay, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Let me just click on message them. I can talk about networking advice, career exploration, choosing a major, because there's a template built in within each of the topics. But you're welcome to use your own authentic language and write it right here. After you're done, we can click on request a meeting based on your availability. But if you would like the professional to choose, you're welcome to indicate it right here. So one good thing about UCAN is that you actually don't have to switch over to another platform, for example, Zoom, because the platform UCAN itself allows you to do your video chatting here. And I also want to point it out that for the platform UCAN, once alumni graduated from our institution, we're going to ask them would they like to be a part of the UCAN network. When they say yeah, then we add them onto here. So people who are on here wants to talk to you and wants to connect with you. So I would say that it will have a higher chance of response rate. All right, so jumping back again. So it is okay for you to understand US business communication and professional etiquette. I'm sure all of you already have that skills, but if you're looking for ways to expand that skill, I recommend the app Fluent U. It's gonna pull different video clips from a lot of different sources like TV shows, movies, so that it will kind of give you an example of what business communication is like. You're also welcome to visit the blog here. Not only just features the app Fluent U, but also with other resources as well. All right, moving on to our next point, develop appropriate materials and approaches. Develop a resume or CV targeted to the industry or function in which you're interested in. Understand how ATS, applicant tracking system, works. Basically, ATS is an AI software that will scan your overall resume and see how well it fits to what the employers are wanting. A lot of the top 500 Fortune companies are using this tool right now. So if you're looking for ways to make your resume more ATS friendly, I definitely recommend checking out this YouTube video. And I want to introduce two more resources that can help you with your resume. VMock. VMock is a tool, it's an AI software that allows you to upload your resume. And after you upload them, it's going to give you a score and some detailed feedbacks. You're welcome to use those detailed feedbacks to kind of revise your resume. And for resume worded here, it is kind of similar to VMock. You will upload your resume together with a job description, probably some of the position that you wanted to apply for. And it's going to, again, give you a score and some detailed feedbacks. You're welcome to use their feedbacks to make your resume more targeted towards that specific job description. And not every organization requires a cover letter, but if you're looking for ways to feel more prepared, I definitely recommend checking out our cover letter resources. So it's going to highlight what to include. We do have an online cover letter builder called the Lettersmith. You're welcome to use the code right here to join our University Career Center's template. We are going to go over some quick tips and quick formatting tips. I especially want to highlight some of the sample here. Okay, so it looks like this person is trying to apply for a development assistant internship in a nonprofit organization, and the job requirement says the following skills: here's how that person kind of highlight their skills and how it connects to what the employers want. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you want to frame that kind of language. And also we said it right here, lettersmith, the code to join our template. All right, so develop a professional community, which means networking with people. If you're looking for more ways to network other than LinkedIn and UCAN, I definitely recommend checking out our networking resources. And you want to stay organized. That means build a targeted list of employers, position pursued, and application status. If you're looking for ways to do that, Muse offers a free spreadsheet template here. And you always want to make sure that you save the job description, because for some of the organizations, they would like to take off the job description before going to the interviewing phase. So when they call you for an interview, you might not be able to remember what the job description says if you did not save it. So I would recommend saving that. Always keep that in handy. And you want to familiarize yourself with the interviewing format, whether that's going to be behavior, case, or technical, both in an in-person or a virtual setting. And practice. We do have some tools to help you practice. Big Interview is another AI software that allows you to record yourself so that you can see, oh, am I moving my hands too much? I know I'm a candidate who likes to use my hands to make some gestures. One thing I really like about Big Interview is that it has industry-specific questions. So for example, if I'm looking for something in data science, I would just click on industry, data science. It will compile a list of questions that is just targeted at the world of data science. So I would say that is a pretty good feature about Big Interview. And also we currently offer behavior and case mock interviews. Here's how you can make an appointment with us. I'm going to do a demo a little bit later on how to make an appointment with us. So we currently offer two types of interview support. The first one is called mock interview, where you will be meeting one-on-one with a career coach in our office, and you will just do a mock interview. But if you're feeling like not ready in the space, that's totally okay. We do have another one called the interviewing tips and strategy, where we can just go over some tips and strategy, just help you to get to know the interview a little bit. All right, last but not the least, execute, persevere, but have alternative plans as well. You want to make sure in your schedule to execute your search, and it's an ongoing process. Don't wait to hear back from employers before pursuing more options. So two ways you can do that is through Handshake. One thing I really like about Handshake is that it has the work authorization filter so that it can make the positions a little bit more international candidates friendly. And also I want to point out for Handshake, we as staff member actually have to go on there and approve those job descriptions so that the positions are a little bit college student friendly. And InterStride, I really want to highlight this platform we just launched a couple of months ago. So you are going to log in with your UMich credential, just like what I'm doing here. All right, so going on. So we're going to do the fun duel again, taking me right in. All right, so you're welcome to take a look at jobs, network, learn, and tools. So I'm not going to go over all of them. I want to highlight the jobs function, but I am going to point out that sometimes I click on that, it's going to pop up a fun video. Let's see if it's going to do that this time. Okay, no. All right, so it has a couple of different filters I really like. So the top 500 H-1Bs, that is by looking at historical data. These are the top 500 H-1B sponsoring employers from the past. And cap exempt, meaning that employers are exempt from the H-1B lottery process. Sponsored last year, the jobs were sponsoring last year. All of them means that they have some experience working with international candidates. Hopefully, they will give you a higher probability of sponsorship. So you're welcome to check that out. All right, so you want to continue leveraging your network and adjust your approach accordingly. We do have a workshop called International Student Career Series, How to Build Your Network. And we have an upcoming one on April 6th from 3:30 to 4:30, and it's on a Thursday. So if you would like to attend, I definitely would welcome you into the space. So we're not going to go over into the networking piece right now. All right, you want to remain flexible and open to possibilities, but also make parallel plans in your home country and globally. Going global is a great tool to help you kind of explore those options. And doesn't always have to be your home country. You're welcome to pick a third alternative country to get started. This one is a really good tool to help you with that. Awesome. So next we have our International Student Resource Toolkit. We're focusing on 4 aspects: adjusting to US culture and language, US job search and internship search, and global job internship search, and grad school or professional school if you're interested. So for global job search, we are going to scroll down a little bit right past the US job search part. All right, so we have a list of resources that can help you guide with your global search as well. All right, so jumping back again, and you want to revisit salary negotiation work authorization rules. If you're looking for salary negotiation help, we have an article called How to Negotiate Salaries, 37 Tips You Need to Know. And we are piloting a UCC negotiation helpline from Monday to Friday, 3 to 4 p.m. This is just an initiative that we're piloting in March and April, so this month and next month. You are welcome to email your questions to this helpline. You're also welcome to just send us a chat via Google Chat. Also, you're welcome to just make a one-on-one appointment with one of the career coaches in the office as well. All right, so to summarize all of the point, first you want to know yourself and what you're looking for. You want to understand your visa, the US job market, employers' expectation and culture norms. You want to develop appropriate job or internship search materials and approaches. You want to execute, persevere, but have alternative plans as well. All right, so some other resources I would like to point out. The International Center is obviously a really good tool for you guys to utilize. Your school and college's career services office, if you would like more support within your major area, and us, University Career Center. So we actually just launched a new way for you to make an appointment as an international student who would like to focus a little bit more on your international student identity. So if you go over to for international student undergrad and master's level, if you're undergrad, I strongly suggest you to attend the resume lab or the internship lab, where you will be in a group setting. For the resume lab, it is like a quick presentation, and then you move on to one-on-one resume review. For the internship lab, it is again like a presentation, but you are welcome to ask our career coaches any questions you might have in the internship search process. And for master's student, you're welcome to take a look at all these options as well. Once you click on a topic, it will take you to the availability of all the career coaches that serves international students. All right, so jumping back, if you're a PhD or in a professional school, you're welcome to click on this link and choose the appointment types. All right, so we talked about International Student Resource Toolkit. Before I let you go, I just want to quickly introduce our upcoming programs. As you can probably see, we just rebranded all of our international student focused programs to International Student Career Series. So if you search that, this will always appear in the title. So if you go on Handshake and search that title, it will give you all of the programs available in the current month. So we have one upcoming called How to Navigate Small Talk. That one, we're going to teach you what is small talk, some small talk topics, some small talk method. But at the very end, we are going to give you a chance to interactively practice with your peers. And we have one called Talk About Your Immigration Status to Employers. It is another partnership with the International Center, where one international student scholar advisor will come over to do a presentation of the work authorization options for F1 and J1 student, but a little quick overview of H1B as well. But the main focus of that program is actually talking about how to disclose that immigration status to employers. And then we have 2 international student career chat with alumni. One is with Yuhan and one is with Celine. Yuhan is a data and policy analyst at Acumen, and Celine is an innovation fellow at Infocus. Yuhan did share with me that her job role has a cross function between data analysis and public policy. So if you're looking for exploring that industry a little bit more, please join us. And Celine has a background in psychology. So if you're interested in their industry, you're welcome to join as well. All right, so we want to wish you the best luck in your job search. If you have any feedbacks, please let us know. Yeah, so this is our feedback QR code. Are there any questions I can help you with at the moment? And also, we are going to have a Q&A section at the very end. All right, so I'm just going to stop sharing for the moment and pass it on to my colleagues.
All right, I will take back over. One moment. All right, Monica, you're ready to go.
Yes. All right. Thanks, Jake. For anyone that joined late, I am Monica Roskamp, an international student and scholar advisor in the International Center. So thank you so much, Jake and Rachel, for providing those useful tips and resources, all pertaining to the job search. So as you can all see, there's a lot of facets that really go into it. But what I really wanted to focus on today is going over your employment options as an F or J1 international student. And before we really get into that, I really just kind of wanted to highlight the importance of really being aware of what your immigration options are in order to really be able to talk to your employer about your immigration status and work authorization before accepting an offer of employment. So many employers, they might be very familiar with how the immigration process works, particularly if they're working with immigration counsel. However, there are other employers that really might not be as familiar. So the best thing you can really do to help yourself is really make sure that you're taking ownership of that process, particularly if you're not necessarily talking directly with human resources, maybe you're talking directly with the recruiter or hiring manager, supervisor. A lot of times those employees of the company are not always fully familiar with the immigration processes. So really to kick us off, what I wanted to first go over were your employment authorization options for before graduation. Probably the bulk and focus of what I'll cover will be after graduation, but I will briefly go over a couple pre-graduation options. Before I do that, I just wanted to get a sense of who we have on this call today. So the majority of our students here at the university are in F1 status, but we also have many J1 students as well. If you are a J1 student, if you could actually just chime in the chat and let me know, because if I see we have some J1 students, I will focus a little bit more in detail as well. But kind of just, so, when you have a moment, if you're in J1, just indicate that in the chat. But otherwise, the first kind of most basic form of employment authorization is on-campus employment, which is referring to employment directly for the University of Michigan Ann Arbor. So both F1 and J1 students are eligible for this. So for F1 and J1 students, you are eligible for up to 20 hours per week of on-campus employment during the fall and winter terms. And then during the university vacations, which do include our spring summer term at U of M, if you are enrolled in winter, and plan to enroll in the fall during that summer gap period, you are eligible for full-time employment. And with F1 status, that authorization is automatic. There's nothing you need to do. If you are a J1 student, there is a letter that you will have to get signed from our office in order to be authorized for on-campus employment, and information regarding that process can be found on our website. Now, for most of you that are F1 students, your form of work authorization, the most common form that students will typically apply for is called Curricular Practical Training, also known as CPT. And that is really for permission to be authorized to engage in paid or unpaid training that is directly related to your major field of study here at the university. And then you will also see right after CPT, it says optional practical training, also known as OPT. So normally when we're talking about CPT and OPT, the main differentiation between the two is that CPT is typically for work authorization or is always for work authorization before graduation, whereas OPT 99% of the time is for work authorization after graduation. So the only reason you really see OPT on this slide before graduation is there is something called pre-completion OPT, but typically the only time we see students use it is if you simply don't qualify for the CPT option. And then the last form of work authorization I wanted to mention is specific only to J1 students. So if you are a J1 student, your work authorization is called academic training, and that is available to you to obtain authorization for employment either before or after your graduation. Given that, the time of this presentation, we could probably talk for hours on work authorization. But given the time limit here today, this was really meant to just give a very brief overview of what your employment authorization options are. So if you are interested in any of these options, I would strongly encourage all of you to visit our website. We have very detailed information on our site for each of these processes. And then if any of you really kind of have very detailed questions, you can always email our office. Or also the fastest way to talk to an advisor about any work authorization questions is really to visit our virtual drop-in advising hours. I'm just going to put the link in the chat real quick. The benefit of this is we have it Monday through Friday. There is no appointment needed, and you will be able to talk one-on-one to an advisor to answer any questions that you have. Okay. So what I really wanted to focus on in the next slide are the employment authorization options for after graduation. And what they are, so for F1 students, you would be looking at applying for post-completion optional practical training. And then for our J1 students, it will be the academic training options that we mentioned. And then, before even applying for any of those, once again, we strongly encourage you to actually take a look at our webpage for that information. So jumping right in, I didn't actually see anyone in the chat mention that they were in J1 status, but for the purpose of the recording, I am briefly going to just quickly go over what academic training is. So regarding the academic training option in the next slide that's outlined, really what it is, and Jake, when you have a moment, if you could just forward the slide, thanks. It's really for authorization to engage in employment, training, or experience that must be directly related to the student's field of study. Like I said, it can be before graduation or after graduation. The main consideration with academic training is timing. So if you are planning to work in the US after graduation, there is some advanced planning required in that you do have to have a job offer lined up before graduation, since any academic training has to be authorized before your graduation. And while there's no requirement to begin working immediately, like the day after graduation with academic training, there is a requirement to begin that employment soon after graduation, typically within a 30-day window. In terms of how much work authorization academic training you are eligible for, the standard amount of academic training for J1 students is 18 months with a couple exceptions. So what those exceptions are, the academic training you are eligible for can't exceed the total length of your program. So for example, if you are in a one-year master's program, your maximum amount of academic training would be 1 year rather than the 18 months. And then the other exceptions mentioned here are if you are actually a PhD student, you are eligible for an additional 18 months, so up to 36 months total upon completion of your PhD degree. And then the last exception is a temporary exception that is put in place by a new government initiative. So if you are a pre-doctoral level student, so bachelor's or master's, there is an exception that exists that if you are in a STEM program, you may also be eligible for an additional 18 months of academic training. And if you do want to learn more about that, I would encourage you to come chat with an advisor at the International Center. But in terms of the actual application process, it's really pretty straightforward. Since everything is processed directly by the International Center, it's really just submitting paperwork online through our M-Passport case management system. And then Typically, from the time we receive everything, it only takes 1 to 2 weeks to actually issue the authorization. And the good news is that since it is not an official government filing that you're submitting to the US government, there is no cost associated with applying for academic training. Okay, so if we could jump to the next slide. So probably what most of you will be interested in applying for is going to be the optional practical training option for F1 students. And this is really to allow you to engage in temporary employment after graduation that must be directly related to your major field of study. So you can't just do any employment. It definitely has to be linked to your degree. And when we say employment, under the 1-year OPT, that employment can be paid or unpaid. In terms of how long you are eligible for that work authorization, OPT, all students are eligible for up to initially 12 months of post-completion OPT work authorization. And there are a couple exceptions to where you might be able to get a little bit longer on your OPT. So one being if you are working for an employer that is willing to sponsor you for the H-1B work visa, and that employer is subject to the H-1B cap or lottery. My colleague Beth will talk about a little bit more about H-1B later on, but basically there is a way where if a H-1B cap employer files an H-1B change of status for you, some students may be eligible for an extension of their OPT to bridge the gap between the OPT expiration and start of H-1B, which typically begins in October 1st of each year. So to learn more about that, you would just be working with your immigration attorney handling the H-1B, and they'll be able to advise you on the specific eligibility criteria and how that works. And then the second way that you could potentially extend your OPT beyond 1 year is if you are in a STEM degree. Some STEM students may be eligible for a 24-month extension of OPT. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail right now about that. We have a whole slide dedicated to STEM. So in a moment, I'll go over the details of what that looks like. What I really wanted to focus on for the purpose of this slide is to kind of just briefly go over what that application process looks like for OPT. So I usually, if I'm getting a lot of questions from students about OPT, the number one thing that I recommend that everyone does if you're interested in taking OPT before you do anything is to take our OPT online training course. It's also referred to as our OPT online workshop, and you can find that on our OPT page of our website. It's actually a required step before you can even apply for an OPT I-20 through our office. But the reason you should do that first, it is really a comprehensive training tutorial. It will teach you everything you need to know about OPT. It goes over in very specific detail how to apply, how to file with the US government, what to do when the OPT is pending, what to do when it's approved. There's a lot of information on it. So that's definitely the first step. Once you've done that, the next step is to actually begin to gather your paperwork for the OPT I-20 request, which you will then submit through our online M-Passport system to request an OPT I-20 from our office. That process typically takes 1 to 2 weeks from the time we receive everything that we need from you. And then once we've actually issued the OPT I-20 to you, you'll then be able to file your OPT application online with the USCIS, which is the US Government Immigration Service. So it is important to really be aware of the processing time for the OPT application with the US government. Currently, so this is actually really good news. I think this year is the fastest the government has been processing OPT in the last many years. The current processing time is that the majority of OPT applications are being approved within 2 months. That processing time is subject to change, and there are fluctuations from case to case. So some students may see a faster processing time, Some students may see 2 months and some may even see a little longer, but 2 months is a really good target time frame to be aware of. And what the implication of that is that you're not legally allowed to begin employment in the US until you both have the OPT employment card in hand and the start date on the card has been reached. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And then the last thing to know is because it is a direct application filing with the US government, there is a government fee associated with that you would pay online. Currently, the fee is $410. It is subject to change. I actually think there is a proposal for it to increase in the near future. I'm not sure when the exact date of increase will be, but that's not something you'll have to worry about since the fee would automatically increase in the online application system. Okay, so I wanted to just go to the next slide and to kind of briefly cover some of the most common questions we get with the OPT application. So when students come visit our office, I would say these questions that you see here are definitely the top questions and topics that we are often talking about. So the first one really revolves around when should you actually be filing your OPT application. And before I get into that, I wanted to really highlight the importance of your I-20 completion date. So all of you should have a specific I-20 program end date, also called completion date on your I-20. And typically that's issued to you, when you first arrive at the university, you'll usually be issued an I-20 for a very standard amount of time. So typically all bachelor students will get the same amount of time, might be 4 years, masters might get 2 years. But that being said, regardless of what is actually printed on your I-20, your graduation timeline will impact your ultimate I-20 completion date. So for example, if you are graduating early, your I-20 completion date would need to be shortened to your last term of required enrollment. So for example, let's say your I-20 completion date printed on your I-20 is December 31 of this year, but maybe you're graduating early this semester. If that's the case, what would happen is at the end of your program, we would automatically need to shorten your I-20 to April 30th, the end of this term. And that's actually done as part of the OPT I-20 process. And then similarly, if you end up needing more time to complete your degree after graduation, just make sure you're coming to our office to request an extension of that I-20 end date so that we can adjust that accordingly. But why I really wanted to highlight that is that the whole timing of your OPT application is based on your graduation timeline and ultimately what will be your final I-20 completion date. So the earliest you can file your OPT application is no earlier than 90 days before your I-20 completion date. And the absolute latest you can file your OPT application is no later than 60 days before your I-20 completion date. So for example, let's say you have an April 30th I-20 end date graduating this semester. The absolute latest date you could actually file your OPT application with the US government would be June 29th, the end of your 60-day grace period. Now, you'll see there's a little asterisk after the 60 days. I cannot stress enough, we definitely don't recommend waiting to file until the very end of the timeline, particularly not the 60th day. As a good rule of thumb and best practice, I generally encourage students to try to file by their I-20 completion date. And that's really just if anything goes wrong with the application. If you file early enough, there's always time to fix and possibly refile the application if needed. Whereas if students are filing super late up to that deadline, if anything does go wrong, like for example, you forget something in the application, there may not be enough time to fix and refile the application. And then getting into question number 2, another common question that we are asked is around what specific OPT start date you will use. Now, the answer to this question really typically depends on what the status of any future jobs or job offers you have are. So if you already have a job offer, that makes this question pretty easy in that you should try to align your OPT start date as close as possible to your actual job offer date. If you don't have a job offer lined up, then it's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to that question. You might have to just base it more on when you would like to be able to begin working. But in terms of what those dates actually look like, the earliest date you can request for your OPT is the date immediately after your I-20 completion date, and the latest possible date would be 60 days after your I-20 completion date. So using the April 30th graduation again, if you are graduating at the end of the semester, your earliest OPT start date would be May 1st, and then the latest start date would be June 29, and then you could, of course, pick any date in between then. One thing to really think about in all of this and a factor into that decision is keeping in mind that students are only allowed up to 90 days of unemployment during the 1 year of post-completion OPT. So that's really where it is helpful to kind of gauge when you might expect to begin employment or when you might like to begin employment. So in the example, let's say you would request a June 29 start date for OPT. It doesn't actually mean you have to begin working on June 29, but your ultimate deadline to begin working would be towards the later end of September, which is where the 90th day would hit. But of course, the less unemployment time you can use in the beginning will give you more flexibility to move employers as needed throughout the duration of that 1 year OPT. All right, so that's kind of post-completion OPT in a nutshell. The last thing I really wanted to go over today is the 24-month STEM extension option of OPT that some students will have. So whether or not you're eligible for STEM extension will be based on a couple factors. So the first being whether or not your degree is on the government STEM list. So STEM meaning science, technology, engineering, and math majors. And the way you can actually verify whether or not your degree is STEM eligible is on page 1 of the I-20. There is a numeric code. It's called the CIP code, which corresponds to your field of study. What you would do is compare that numeric code against the government's official STEM list, which is linked here on this page. And if that code matches the code on the government STEM list, it means that your degree is eligible for STEM extension. And then if it's not listed, then you would not be eligible for this additional 2-year extension period. So that's just the first step. In addition to having a STEM major, there are actually requirements of the STEM employer as well. So the first being is that your employer must be enrolled in the government's E-Verify program. What that is a government program that allows employers to verify work authorization for its employees. And typically there's no way to know for sure without asking your employer. So if you're not sure, the best contact within the organization to ask is to check with human resources. But if they are eligible for or if they do participate in E-Verify, then your employer would also need to help fill out a Form I-983 training plan. And I see a quick question in the chat. So it's a question about, does the 24 extension mean total 24 months or 36? So good question. In total, STEM eligible students would have 36 months on OPT. So everyone gets the 1 year, and then on top of that, you would get the additional 24 months for, yes, a total of 3 years. And then, so we're, given the time limit here, I wasn't going to go into the specifics of STEM, but what I wanted to do is also encourage all of you, if you are in a STEM major, definitely visit our STEM page, which is linked here. There's a lot of information on that STEM. Like I said, your employer would need to meet the eligibility criteria here. And then the other requirements too, just like post-completion OPT, your employment would need to be directly related to your major field of study. And one stricter thing to note about STEM is that the employment for each job must be at least 20 hours per week, and the employment must be paid. So that's a little bit different than the one-year OPT, where it was mentioned that employment can be unpaid. With the STEM, it must be a paid training opportunity. So that's all that I wanted to cover today. Just to reiterate, I saw there's a follow-up question. The E-Verify program is a government program that allows employers to verify. Oh, sorry, I see this is a direct message, but I'll just reiterate anyways. It allows employers to verify work authorization for all of its employees. And once again, you would ask human resources whether or not the company participates. So that being said, these are really the work authorization options for our students for before and after graduation. If you're looking to work in the US long term, eventually you will need to switch to some other type of employment sponsored status. And really one of the most common employer sponsored visas is the H-1B category. So my colleague Beth is actually going to go over a little bit about the H-1B and green card related processes now.
Thanks, Monica. Yeah, I just wanted to go over a couple of the basic features of the H-1B because that is the most commonly used work visa in the US. And the H-1B is for a temporary worker in a specialized occupation. So what do we mean by a specialized occupation? Well, the job itself must require a bachelor's degree or higher in a specialized field of study, and then you must have that corresponding academic credential at the time of filing. Temporary, what do we mean by temporary? It means that the H-1B is good for up to 6 years. It can be taken in no more than 3-year increments at a time, but in general, there is that 6-year limit. There are some exceptions to that for people who are in the permanent residency process before the end of their 5th year on the H-1B. So the 6 years is not a fixed set time limit. Unlike the OPT, where you are making the application to the USCIS, with the H-1B, it is an employer-sponsored visa category. So it is the employer who files the paperwork on your behalf. Now, many large employers, universities, et cetera, will either have in-house attorneys or immigration specialists who process the H-1B on behalf of the employer. But smaller firms may not. So sometimes those organizations have to hire an immigration attorney in order to file the paperwork on their behalf. The H-1B is both employer and job specific. So employer specific, meaning that you can only work for the employer who applied for the H-1B on your behalf in the position that is listed on the H-1B paperwork. It can be for part-time or full-time employment. It doesn't really matter. And you can also work for more than one employer as long as each employer sponsors you and files paperwork on your behalf for the H-1B. Now, I have a basic procedure flow sheet right here to just give you an idea of the process. So the first part is the information gathering. The employer will need copies of all your documents, your I-20s, if you were on OPT, your EAD card, if you were ever in a J1 status, copies of your DS-2019s, and if you were subject to the 2-year home residency requirement, either evidence that you fulfilled that requirement or have a waiver of it. Next, the employer must, well, there are 2 government agencies that are involved in the process, the U.S. Department of Labor and the USCIS. So initially, the employer must attest to the U.S. Department of Labor that the wage offered to you makes or meets or exceeds what is considered prevailing wage or actual wage for that position, whichever is higher. Now, the prevailing wage is just an average wage for that particular position in the region where the job is located. And employers can get that information from either the Department of Labor website, or they can use private surveys to determine what would be the prevailing wage. Once the prevailing wage and actual wage are determined and it is shown that you are making at or above that amount, the employer will submit what's called a labor condition application to the Department of Labor. This is done online and is usually certified within 1 week. Once that piece is completed, the department or the hiring organization would file the H-1B petition, the I-129 form, with the appropriate service center. Currently, actually, USCIS is doing very well and are adjudicating cases in 2 to 3 months, sometimes less. If there is a time constraint, there is also a premium processing option for employers where they can, for an additional fee, it can be approved in 15 days. So the whole process itself can take about 6 weeks, or if with premium processing, or up to 3 to 4 months with regular processing. You may have heard, of course, that there is a limited number of H-1Bs that are given out every year, what's called the H-1B cap. And that is 65,000 plus 20,000 for people who have graduated with a master's degree or higher here in the US. Employers have to register with the government and then submit names to be put into a lottery system, you typically in the month of March. And then once the lottery is run, then employers are notified of which employees were selected, and they can submit paperwork for those individuals. If you work for a institution of higher education and certain nonprofits or government research organizations, they are exempt from the H-1B cap. So for example, if you were to work at any university or institution of higher education, we are exempt from the cap, and which means that we can apply for as many H-1Bs as we need. A lot of people ask, can I skip OPT and go straight to H-1B? And a lot of if you have an employer who's willing to sponsor you initially, that is an option they will put out there. Just keep in mind, we always recommend that you apply for the OPT, just because you may not get selected for the H-1B cap if you are working for one of those organizations that is subject to the cap. Last year in fiscal year 2023, there were over 483,000 registrations for the H-1B cap. And as I mentioned earlier, there's only that 65 plus the 20,000. So many people are not selected. So if you have that OPT, or even are fortunate enough to get the STEM OPT, then you have time to go into multiple rounds of the H-1B cap season. So that's just something to keep in mind. If there are limited other work authorizations, so if there's anybody from Canada or Mexico, there is the TN option. There's a list of designated occupations that can be used. And then also for Australians, there's an E3 option. But of course, those two are more limited. And so the H-1B really is the most commonly used work authorization. Now, if you decide you want to continue your career in the US and will be looking at staying, and there is the permanent residency process. Now, there are many ways to get permanent residency. Some of those are, related to family-based. If you have a family member or a spouse who's a US citizen, there are those methods, but we're just going to focus here on the employment-based permanent residency application. And the only thing we like to stress is that it can be a complicated process and can take many years to complete. So you need to plan ahead. And, if you do have an employer who would like to retain your services for beyond that temporary 6 years, which the H-1B affords, might be good to speak about it early on in your employment. Like the H-1B, the permanent residency process can be job and employer specific, just like the H-1B, and the U.S. Department of Labor will be involved. It's a 3-stage process, as you can see from the flow chart. The first stage goes to the U.S. Department of Labor and is the application for labor certification. In this stage, an employer must test the job market to make sure that there are no U.S. workers minimally qualified, willing, and able to take the position. So a recruitment is done, and if there are no U.S. workers identified, the employer may then go to the second stage of the process, which is the immigrant petition. Once again, that second part of the position or stage is still about the employer and the job offered. So as the employer who prepares that Form I-140 signs it and submits it to the USCIS. The first 2 stages, the first stage, actually, it can take well over a year. And the reason is that the employer must get a formal prevailing wage determination from the Department of Labor, which can take anywhere from 7 to 9 months. And of course, they have to do the recruitment. And then once a petition is filed with the U.S. Department of Labor, they are taking about 6 to 8 months to certify those. So once again, that takes well over a year. The second stage, the I-140, can take either 2 weeks to up to 13 months. And the discrepancy is due to the fact that that is also eligible for premium processing. So if the employer pays an additional fee, it will be adjudicated in the 15 days as opposed to the longer time frame. The last stage is the adjustment of status. And this is the point in the application where it is no longer about the job and the employer. It is then about your background. Do you have any criminal history or reason that we would want to exclude you from becoming a permanent resident? So that last stage is prepared and signed by you. And it can take 1 year. Actually, there've been a little bit better on this, anywhere from 6 months to longer. And the reason why it may take longer is that there is what's called a backlog of immigrant visas. So the US only gives out a certain number of immigrant visas per year, and it's limited to no more than 7% to foreign nationals of each country. So for countries where we have little immigration coming from those countries, they're able to file the adjustment of status right away. But for countries such as China and India, there are backlogs because we have more people coming to the US from those countries. For those people who are backlogged and cannot file the adjustment of status right away, the H-1B can be extended based on the approved I-140 in 3-year increments as long as necessary until the entire process is completed. There are some ways where to skip the first stage of the process, that labor certification, so it becomes a 2-stage as opposed to a 3-stage process. And for those, there are very specific types of cases. Therefore, those people who have extraordinary ability, who are outstanding professors and researchers, and those who are doing work in the national interest. So those applications, especially the extraordinary ability and the national interest waiver, do not require a sponsor. such as an employer. You can self-sponsor in those categories. The outstanding professor researcher does require an employment offer though, and to be sponsored by the employer. So there are those three categories that bypass labor certification. They also can be premium processed. And, so time varies, of course, when you're looking at those categories, and as the names imply, there's a lot of evidence that goes into showing that one is extraordinary, outstanding, or even that your research is in the national interest. So it takes longer to prepare those cases, but once they're filed, then it is an advantage because it's a faster process than going through the three-stage regular permanent residency process. For people who are working as professors in universities, there is even a shorter process for those called special handling. So for any teaching faculty, the process, even though it goes through the three-stage process, is a much faster, and all we have to show is that the selected candidate was the most qualified. So that's kind of a quick overview. If there are any questions, we can address those. And yep.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Now, are there any questions in the chat that anyone's been holding back until this time? You can also unmute yourself if you'd like.
I have a question. So, I was trying to find a summer internship and I'm on a F1 visa. So I was wondering, like, what are some steps we need to complete before like landing on a job?
Sure. Well, I can address the immigration piece. There might be other considerations, but so once you actually find a job, I'm assuming that you are continuing on enrollment for the fall term. You're not graduating anytime soon. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not graduating.
Okay, sure. So you would need to apply for what's called curricular practical training, CPT, in order to get authorization before you can actually engage in that internship. But really the first step before you do that is actually obtaining that job offer, since that will be one of the required documents is a detailed training description from your employer as part of that CPT authorization. So the only thing I would say from our end on the immigration end is just make sure before actually accepting that job offer that you're communicating to your employer regarding any expectations for a start date and the timeline of what your CPT process would look like, keeping in mind that we typically recommend submitting that request to us several weeks before the start date, since it usually takes about 1 to 2 weeks to issue the CPT authorization from the time we receive everything that we need. But obviously, if anything's missing, it might take longer with some back and forth. So just keep in mind the overall timeline for that.
Okay, so
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Is that just after receiving the job offer, we need to complete the CPT and
exactly
center? Okay.
And what I would recommend, the very first thing, once you get a job offer, the very first step in terms of learning about CPT, understanding what you need to do, just like our OPT online course or our OPT online workshop, similarly, there's also an extensive CPT training tutorial online, and it will teach you everything you need to know about how to apply. And I'm sending our CPT page in the chat, and from that website, you can actually find our virtual online CPT training course.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, are there any other questions?
Hello, I have a question about interview. Should I bring up I will use CPT or OPT during interview if the employer do not ask?
That is a great question. I can jump in a little bit. So, we actually have a workshop, like I said, about disclosing your status with employers, and we try to ask alumni, a lot of them, about their perspectives on that question. So some of them said that it is okay for you to disclose that during the first round of interview, so that you and the employer are both not wasting each other's time. But they did report that they ended up with more first round of interviews, whereas some of them just keep on holding back to the very end and disclose it in the last round of interview or the moment that they already received their offer. But our general advice for you is that please disclose your status anytime before you're about to sign the contract. So that is our general advice. I don't know if any of the international student and scholar advisor have any opinions on that as well.
I would definitely agree with that, Rachel. You know, it really depends. It's a case by case scenario. But the most important thing is having that conversation definitely before accepting the offer. And then also keep in mind, as part of the job application process, a lot of employers have standard questions aimed at gathering information on employment authorization as part of that application. One will often be a question asking if you have if you're legally authorized to work in the United States. Typically, we do recommend answering yes to that question, just so your application doesn't automatically get rejected. Since, for example, with CPT, you might not have work authorization today, but hypothetically, you could have work authorization in 1 to 2 weeks. But I echo Rachel's sentiment on just making sure it's disclosed before the actual acceptance of the offer.
And also, I just want to jump in. The employer can ask, not only are you legally authorized to work, but will you in the future require sponsorship in order to continue working?
Hello, can I ask
Thank
one,
you.
can I ask one question? Yes, sorry, I think it seems to be already covered during the presentation, but I think I need to ask this to clarify this. So the for the processing of the OPT, I think I heard that it can take about like 2 months abruptly. I mean approximately, and then what if we apply for the file that application after the 1 month after the graduation, one month later, then are we still allowed to stay in US during that gap year time?
Yep, really good question. We get that question a lot from students. Think of the OPT application filing as an extension of your legal F1 status in the United States, since even when you're on OPT, your immigration status doesn't change. You're still in F1 visa status. And like I said, your deadline to apply for OPT would be no later than the end of your 60-day grace period. So even if you file, for example, 30 days after your I-20 completion date within that grace period, you're still maintaining legal F1 status in the United States, and you can remain in the United States for however long it takes the government to adjudicate and approve your OPT application. The only implication is you simply don't have work authorization in the US until you have that OPT, and the start date has been reached. But definitely in the interim and gap period, as long as you timely file for OPT, you can still maintain your legal status in the US.
Okay, so even after like the 60 days, the grace period, we are still allowed to stay then.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, great questions, everyone, and thanks to Rachel, Monica, and Beth all for contributing to the answers. Do we have any other questions? We have a few more minutes left until the session officially ends. So just wanted to make sure that all questions that you have are answered. And I do want to reiterate that the presentation recording will be made available. I'll send an email out to every student who registered for this session with a link to the recording and the PowerPoint slides. And Rachel, do you know, will UCC's slides, will your slides be available as well?
Yeah, so we don't want to share a slide, but we did have a handout that will cover everything that says on the slides.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so UCC will have a handout, the IC will have slides, and the recording will be made available. So hopefully that can answer anything you might have missed or any additional questions you'd have as well.
Hi, I do have another question. So Richu and I talked, I don't remember, yesterday or 2 days ago about this post-completion OPT timeline. There's a graph and there says something about extension, transfer, change of status, or leaving US in 60 days. Kind of wondering what does that mean? Rachel, do you remember the graph that's like?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Monica was talking about the OPT workshop, the timeline on the OPT.
Oh, sure. So there's a lot that can be done. So feel free to correct me. I'm not sure the specifics of your conversation, Rachel. But within the 60-day grace period following your I-20 completion date, there's a couple options on what you have and what you can do. So one option would be, if you don't apply for OPT at all, your deadline to depart the US would be by the end of that 60-day grace period. Separately, there's the option to apply for OPT no later than the end of that 60-day grace period. Essentially, something would need to happen, particularly if you're trying to maintain your status in the United States. There needs to be some action taken by the end of that 60-day grace period, whether it be a CVIS transfer. So for example, you could also choose to transfer your CVIS record to another school to start a new program. You could continue a new program at U of M in which admissions would need to process the new I-20 by the end of that 60 days. Or alternatively, if you're looking to change immigration status in the United States, to maintain that continuous status, a change of status would need to be filed by the end of that period. Feel free to chime in if you have.
So after completion of OPT, there will be 60 days.
Oh, you're talking about the end of, okay. Yeah, so yeah, at the end of OPT, so if you're approved for OPT, you are given that 60-day grace period at the end of OPT, as long as you have not surpassed your maximum unemployment time. But basically the purpose of that grace period, it's really intended to allow you time to wrap up your affairs in the United States. So either you can remain in the US and depart within that 60-day grace period. Similarly, you could, for example, file a change of status to something else, but employment is not permitted during that grace period. So it's simply a grace period to allow for a transition.
Okay. And I saw this 90 days before OPT ends and it says apply for STEM extension. Does that mean we have to apply in the 90? Okay. In 90 days?
Yes, no earlier than 90 days and no later than your OPT expiration date. Now, I don't recommend applying on the extreme ends. I don't recommend aiming for the 90th day, and I don't recommend aiming for your OPT expiration date, just to make sure you're not off by that day. Aiming for somewhere right in the middle of that time frame is the best.
Okay. Thank you. I don't
You're
think I
welcome.
have any other questions.
Great. So we are about right at time. And it looks like there are no lingering questions in the chat. So I think I'll stop recording now.